Love them,
I love you!
hate them,
No one should be a billionaire. Yes.
it's undeniable there's something captivating about tech bros.
Spellbinding, mesmerizing leader of people.
It's all in the same story. We have socially awkward geeks obsessed with programming instead of partying. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, they create the biggest and most influential companies of all time. But this genius doesn't stop here. It grows as the company becomes bigger and expands into transport, space travel, philanthropy, AI, the list goes on. Their visions know no bounds. Their efforts are inhuman. These guys seem immune to burnout, they can keep track of God knows how many operations, and that's without mentioning the fact they've shaped our world as we know it today. Even politicians, who are theoretically the most powerful people in the world, can't keep up with them. Regulations, taxes, everything they can practically propose has been lagging behind them for decades.
Taxes, all the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
Instead, they court them to try to secure investment. In short, tech bros live in a totally different reality from the rest of us. And that's no surprise, because with our consent and the help of the media, these guys have managed to fashion themselves into the gods of our time. When someone says the word God, what comes to mind? Probably terms like all-powerful, just, all-knowing, loving, the absolute best of the best, basically. Scripture teaches us God's never wrong. He can do what he wants and we just have to accept he has the best in mind for us. But to philosophers like Epictetus and Hume, this picture seemed a bit too perfect. Their question was simple: can an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God really exist if there's evil in the world? They agree it can't. Of course, the essence of faith is to look past logical contradictions like these. They're meant to constrain us human beings, not God. People of faith believe the only thing they can be sure of is they need to obey his commands unconditionally because he actually does possess those attributes. The thing is, tech bros may be far from being actual gods, but they aren't so far from him when it comes to being beyond humanity, because the ways we know them corresponds almost exactly to those three attributes of his. Take this as an example. Here's a word I'm sure you've heard a lot when it comes to tech bros.
Visionary.
Visionary.
Vision.
It makes sense it's used so often. One of the most appealing things about them is their incredible foresight concerning the next big thing. But when I say next big thing, I mean what will change the world. I'm talking Microsoft Office, the first iPhone, Amazon delivery, Tesla cars, things we couldn't imagine the world without today. It's the grandeur of their visions that makes us marvel, the fact their creations have permeated every part of our lives. Add in the fact they seem to come up with these visions spontaneously, and we can see how they can appear to possess superhuman vision.
How on earth has one person been able to innovate in this way? What is it about you?
And with vision comes innovation. Tech bros talk about it a lot.
Innovator.
Innovate.
Repeated innovation culture.
But that's because it's a crucial part of who they are. As visionaries, they have to innovate. If something's not as efficient as it can be, or there's some problem in our lives that could be solved, then they have to find the solution. It's in their nature as omniscient beings. During one of his TED interviews, Elon Musk is described as follows.
You have an ability to think at a system level of design.
And he goes on to credit that characterization to the fact that he
boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy.
That means instead of innovating by comparing a new X with an already present Y, Musk innovates based on truths that are set in stone. For him, these truths are based on physics. For someone like Zuckerberg, judging from his interviews, psychology. The problem with our world for Musk, and no doubt tech bros in general, is that a lot of stuff has been based on analogy because it's often easiest to think that way as human beings. We like to compare new or unknown things with the things we're familiar with. The role of tech bros, who think more fundamentally, is to rectify this situation as innovators who understand the way things really work. So just as God's knowledge allowed him to create the earth, the omniscience of tech bros fuels their visions. And these visions are only getting bigger. A city on Mars, space tourism, the metaverse, AI, and now even a utopian city right here on Earth. They're not just creators of products anymore, they're creators of whole worlds. It's through this superhuman image that tech bros can inspire regular people like ourselves. We can't imagine what the future really holds, so we'll put our faith in the visions of those who do. Why go against an omniscient mind? Who else could have imagined a few decades ago that almost every adult in the developed world would have a portable computer in their pocket? Not many of us, I assume. But Steve Jobs did. And who would have guessed we'd be confined to our homes for months because of a pandemic? Again, not many of us. But Bill Gates knew, 5 whole years before one happened. Now, you might ask, wait, what about technology and medical experts? Surely they knew. Gates himself credited Vaclav Smith's 2012 book Global Catastrophes and Trends, the Next 50 Years, as the source of his prediction concerning pandemics. And the answer is, of course they knew, but that's not the point. Because we're not just talking about expertise, but omniscience. Tech bros are presented as being beyond global leaders and experts because they can predict certain phenomena and make sure they occur according to their own visions. To the everyday person, they appear to be juggling an inhuman number of different thought processes at once. There's a reason they all congregate at Silicon Valley.
The kind of things that prosper here have a big idea and a story to go with it that captures the imagination.
This is the story in which we're the minor characters. The reason they're allowed to write it is because only they're capable of doing so. No one else is like them.
But this is not in most people's heads.
None of us can truly understand why their plan is the plan because sometimes these things seem to have a bad effect on us. But it's because their knowledge far surpasses ours that we just have to deal with the seemingly negative consequences of their actions and let them get on with it. If we have any negative feelings towards their actions, then they just come from our misunderstanding and lack of faith. But it's not all doom and gloom, if we recall their omnibenevolence.
SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and Boring Company are philanthropy. If you say philanthropy is love of humanity, they are philanthropy.
Something you'll often hear tech bros or their supporters say is they're not in it for the money. They live modestly, sleep rough,
I have a little 1-bedroom apartment with a mattress on the floor.
even support schemes like universal basic income. They're just obsessed with what they're doing and the positive effects it will have for humanity. If you think of the question, how do I become rich? You'll often hear the answer is to come up with a product or service that solves an issue. If you take their word for it, this is what tech bros are doing on a massive scale. They're connecting the world, making it more efficient and free, and even have plans to save humanity. It doesn't matter if in practice Facebook actually tends to isolate people from each other more than connect them, or that Twitter, now X, has become far less efficient since Musk's takeover. The main thing is the benevolent motivation that underlies these projects. There are 3 important points here. 1. Tech bros are there to solve our problems and make our futures better. 2. They do this because they're just inherently obsessed with solving problems and unearthing the truth. And 3. Because they have unique access to the truth, giving us what we didn't realize we needed as a benevolent act. A bit like Prometheus bringing fire to humankind. The profit that comes with solving problems is just a bonus, not the point. Basically, because of their omniscience, tech bros know how to solve the problems of the world better than governments or international institutions. Plus, they have the money to do it without all the political wrangling and objections. To put it into perspective, while the UK government has planned to increase skills funding by £3.8 billion, or $4.6 billion over 2 to 3 years, Gates donated $5 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just in 2022. Considered in terms of pure numbers, this money would have a much faster and greater positive impact on a larger proportion of the world. But always remember, they're not doing this for profit or to save their own image. They can't be restricted to materialistic desires such as money because their vision, and the goodness that drives them to share it with us, surpasses that. Again, profit is just a bonus, not the point. Tech bros are keen to hammer this point home. They make a show of downplaying their riches to the media. They live Spartan lifestyles because work and life are one and the same for them. They don't have time for the distractions wealth affords. For them, it's all about their passion to make the world a better place and build inspiration for the masses. It's the most an individual could do for humanity as a whole. It borders on self-sacrifice. Remind you of anyone? I promise, this is no arbitrary comparison. The God of the Old Testament did things we might find cruel, like torture his followers and put the whole world underwater. So the New Testament introduced him in a self-sacrificial human form to remind humanity that his ultimate plan for us is our salvation. But if you're going to inspire the masses to have faith in your plan, you ultimately have to stand over them to show them the way forward. In other words, you have to demonstrate your omnipotence.
And I mean, if you do simple math, say okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company.
As we saw, tech bros are willing to undergo near-on self-sacrifice to make our lives better and even save our species. Not everyone can do this. For most of us, a 9 to 5 is enough to make us feel exhausted. The time outside work is usually spent on things that help us recuperate from the toil of our jobs. But tech bros seem immune to burnout and have little apparent need for sleep. They'll work 16-hour days, 7 days a week to make sure their numerous ventures are running smoothly, which implies their minds remain sharp the whole time. It's insane to think about when even God rested on the 7th day. But these inhuman powers are only natural for them. When you know how to change the world for the betterment of humanity and are driven by this purpose, by necessity you're also driven to exercise your omnipotence to the fullest. And, as we've already seen, they've managed to shape the world we live in today. But there's a lot more to be done, more ways to make the world a better, more efficient place to live in and ensure humanity's future, which is why they haven't ceased their endeavours. Remember, God didn't just leave us after he finished making the world. The task is a bit easier for them now, though, since they've already established themselves as gods at this point. You can see this in the way they play a huge role in global affairs, as well as our everyday lives. This starts a cycle. Tech bros gain tremendous power, which makes them desire sovereignty of their own, and when this is practically granted to them through a lack of strict governmental regulation, their belief that they can never fail grows. And if you do suggest they failed in some way, then you're inviting the wrath of God. Like the God of the Old Testament that demanded absolute faith from even his most devoted followers, tech bros want to hear only praise for their visions of the world. But even if they don't, it doesn't really matter in the end. Because even if every scandal sets them back another step, they will have already taken 2 steps forwards.
In Facebook's case, we have something I call blow forward, where they take 2 steps forward, there's some type of public reaction, and they just take a little step back.
So we've seen in what way tech bros have assumed God's attributes. The main question though is, how has this happened? How have they managed to become the gods of our time? Economics is obviously an important factor to consider. The rush to deregulate the global economy and slash taxes in the 1980s meant tech corporations could amass crazy wealth and with it top PR teams and power. But although these factors are relevant, tech bros having the aura of God speaks to something more cultural. I'm not saying economics and culture aren't tied up, not at all. But in talking about God, I want to focus on his traditional role in culture and how tech bros have appropriated it. It's no coincidence words like visionary and philanthropist are associated with them. As social creatures, we're given, to varying extents, to unconsciously recycle easy to remember, oft repeated terms. They're the basis of our everyday interactions and allow us to speak freely without dwelling on every word. We might forget this sometimes, but people with large media platforms are people too, and have the same tendency. The only difference is that when they recycle these terms, they're more likely to be re-recycled on a mass scale. This means these terms will be unconsciously used more and more in public and get normalized. The media here are like apostles and priests preaching the greatness of God to the masses, who end up unquestioningly associating the words God and great. Think about yourself. When you hear the word innovation or philanthropy, your mind probably turns to your Gates and Musks of the world, even if you go on to challenge these associations later on. If this hasn't happened to you at some point, it certainly has to me. Many times. Of course, it's not like the media or the public never say anything bad about tech bros. Sometimes they end up looking like really terrible people. Thing is, God has often looked pretty awful throughout history too. He seems to have straight up ignored the worst crimes committed against humanity and the planet, yet still has the nerve to demand faith from his followers. In his human form, he was even labelled a criminal and crucified. The point is that both God and tech bros can screw up so many times yet remain untouchable. The biggest fine a tech company has ever received was about 1/800th of its value, and the widely discussed antitrust hearings just passed through the news cycle like everything else. Tech bros, like God, have the resources to remind people it's all part of a plan, that faith is messy and might not always make sense. To help people accept this thought, God would perform miracles or send his son to save humanity. Today, tech bros will flash their philanthropic credentials and also promise to preserve humanity from extinction, knowing this will receive coverage no matter what's happened in the near past. You see, media organizations love a story of an outsider defying all the odds to achieve something great. It's because we like it too and want to hear more about it. So many films and books are based on this central concept. Even God had to put himself into ragged human form to create this kind of legend for himself. And a huge part of such a story is that an individual will make mistakes, hit rock bottom, but still make it back up for the betterment of not only themselves, but everyone else. In the end, they, and so their mistakes, always end up being forgiven because of the greater good they contribute to. These stories speak to us because we screw up as well and have those moments where it seems hopeless to continue pursuing our projects and dreams. Sometimes we just need that extra boost from something or someone else to get us back on track. We crave inspiration. So when you have someone like Musk talk about building it, it speaks to something fundamental to us as human beings. And inspiration related to changing the world is the ultimate inspiration, especially when we as individuals feel powerless to change things ourselves. But you might be thinking, Benjamin, I like being inspired, sure, but I can't stand tech bros or God. Surely there are other, less potentially problematic sources of inspiration people can draw on. And of course there are. What I'm trying to figure out is why it's tech bros specifically who can still retain their godlike images in spite of numerous criticisms like yours. The media and the economy are factors, of course, but I think there's something even more fundamental lying behind their godlike status. As famously stated by Nietzsche, the fact we killed God. Remember, I said near the start of the video that tech bros are far from being actual gods. This is because they don't literally possess his attributes, but they come close to them in the imagination, and that's what's important. You see, Nietzsche's claim, to put it simply, is that with the death of God comes the loss of inherent values. So if we're not going to heaven or hell for being good or bad, shouldn't we just do what's best for us, what feels most natural? Actually, this is basically what Nietzsche advocates, and why he doesn't believe in free will. Most of us are destined to act in ways that make us weak and conforming. A select few, the Übermenschen, will be strong and independent. What differentiates the Übermensch from your regular mensch is their ability to recognize they have to forge their own values and stick by them even if everyone else shuns them. You can guess which mensch tech bros identify with more. But many of us would see a problem with this conclusion. We might agree the cultural zeitgeist has no place for God outside isolated instances and private worship, but we don't want to have a world of strong over weak. We want universally accepted values that are valuable in themselves. And most of us, I suspect, wouldn't see this as a sign of weakness and conformity. We just see it as something that would make the world a better place for everyone. This is basically what makes the struggle for something like human rights so important to us. Without these agreed upon principles, we'd feel as detached from the world as Nietzsche himself did. But it's the fact we want to live by universal values that demonstrates the God-sized hole in our world. If religion has done one thing well, it's that it makes people feel secure. Good things happen for a reason, just like bad things do. Either way, you'll be going to heaven or hell. There's always that security of a given path available to people. The feeling of living in a world based on shared values is meant to provide the secular equivalent of this sense of security. They give the world an order in which we can locate the right and wrong paths to take. It's with this idea in mind that Heidegger famously said, "Only a God can save us." So you can see why tech bros, who are so well placed to assume the image of gods, can make it appear as though they'll be the ones who will secure our salvation. Think back to what we've discussed. The issues they talk about always concern either our most intimate needs, such as human connection, or existential threats like climate change. In short, they're always grand topics that capture our imaginations and in relation to which we feel mostly powerless. So having godlike figures assure us they can solve these issues and change the world for the better will inevitably have some kind of resonance and give them a privileged space in our world. It doesn't matter if you or me or a large proportion of people don't believe their claims. Religions still retain a privileged status in many parts of the world, even though more people than ever don't identify with one. Tech bros are in a similar position. They're not the most popular people in the world at the moment, but they remain a significant force nonetheless. And if there's one big difference between them and traditional religion, it's that unlike the latter, they've continued shaping our world to their heart's content. Maybe that's their reward for filling the God-shaped hole in our world. But one question remains. Will God be killed again? Hello my wonderful viewers. Wait, before you click off, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having watched the whole video. It really means a lot to me. And if you could like and subscribe, that would be amazing. I don't want to be that guy on YouTube, but fact is, these things really help push the channel and the video. For all my video sources, please check the Google Docs form in the description. And until next time, all the best.